My brutal billionaire CEO ex-husband brought his pregnant mistress to flaunt their fertile relationship at the reunion. Until I arrived with our triplets he never knew existed. The color drained from Dominic Blackwood's face as 3 children stepped into the ballroom, their gray eyes, his eyes, scanning the crowd until they found him. His champagne glass froze midway to his lips. His perfectly crafted speech about his miracle pregnancy, with his new fiancée forgotten as he stared at living proof that everything he'd built his life upon was a lie. "That's not possible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden hush that fell across the Harvard Business School reunion. "You would have told me." "Would I?" Aria Winters replied, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "After you publicly humiliated me, claiming I was barren when you knew it was your fertility issue? After you told everyone who would listen that I wasn't a real woman, because I couldn't have children." Beside him, his pregnant fiancée's hand dropped from her swollen belly, her smug smile vanishing as she looked between Dominic and the 3 9-year-olds who were unmistakably his children. "You told me you couldn't have children," she hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That it was her who was infertile, not you. Have you ever wondered what happens when a decade of carefully constructed lies comes crashing down in a single moment? When the truth you've been running from finally catches up to you in the most public, undeniable way? If you've ever experienced the sweet vindication of seeing justice finally served, give this video a like and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that will leave you breathless. Hi, my beautiful sisters. This story is for every woman who's been told she wasn't enough. For every woman who's been blamed for something that wasn't her fault. For every woman who picked herself up after devastation and built something beautiful from the ashes. Your worth isn't determined by your fertility, your relationship status, or what anyone else thinks of you. Your worth comes from within, from your strength, your resilience, and your capacity to love. Remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. If Aria's journey resonates with you, stay with me. Her story might just give you the courage to write the next chapter of your own. The story of Aria Winters and Dominic Blackwood began 15 years earlier in the hallowed halls of Harvard Business School, where ambition and brilliance collided in a perfect storm of attraction. Aria Chun, as she was known then, was a scholarship student with a razor-sharp mind for finance and a quiet determination that set her apart from her more privileged peers. The daughter of Chinese immigrants who ran a small grocery store in Queens, she had fought for every opportunity, earned every accolade through sheer grit and intelligence. Dominic Blackwood couldn't have been more different. The heir to a banking fortune, he moved through the world with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in it. Tall, devastatingly handsome, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to see right through people's defenses. He was both admired and feared for his ruthless intelligence and unapologetic ambition. They met during a heated debate in their venture capital seminar, where Aria had challenged his assessment of a case study with such precision and insight that the normally unflappable Dominic had been momentarily speechless. That night, he'd waited for her outside the library. "No one has ever dismantled my argument like that before," he said, falling into step beside her as she walked across the moonlit campus. "Perhaps you should construct better arguments," Aria replied, not breaking stride or showing any sign she was impressed by his attention. Dominic laughed, a genuine sound that softened his usually sharp features. "Have dinner with me tomorrow. We can debate properly without an audience." Aria stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "I don't date classmates. It complicates things." "I'm not asking for a date," Dominic countered smoothly. "I'm asking for a conversation, unless you're afraid your position won't hold up under closer scrutiny." It was a challenge, delivered with a smile that didn't quite hide the competitive gleam in his eyes. Aria should have walked away. Later, in her darkest moments, she would wonder how differently her life might have unfolded if she had. But something about his intensity, the way he spoke to her as an intellectual equal rather than just another pretty face, made her nod. "Fine, dinner, but Dutch treat. I pay my own way." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied, though the concept of splitting a bill was clearly foreign to him. That dinner led to another, and another. Their relationship evolved from intellectual sparring partners to reluctant friends to something deeper neither had anticipated. For Arya, who had always prioritized her education and career over romance, Dominic was an intoxicating contradiction. Arrogant yet vulnerable in unexpected moments, privileged yet driven by an almost pathological need to prove himself, controlling in business yet surprisingly considerate in private. By graduation, they were inseparable. When Dominic proposed 6 months later, presenting a flawless 5-carat diamond with the same confidence he brought to business deals, Arya hesitated only briefly before saying yes. Her parents had concerns. They found Dominic charming but sensed something beneath his polished exterior that worried them. "He looks at you like you're the most precious thing in the world," her mother said in Mandarin as they prepared dinner the night before the wedding. "But also like you're something he's acquired. Be careful, daughter. Men like him are used to owning, not partnering." Arya had dismissed her mother's concerns as old-world thinking, the natural wariness of immigrant parents toward someone so different from themselves. She was modern, educated, strong-willed. She and Dominic were equals, partners in every sense. The first 2 years of marriage seemed to prove her right. They were the golden couple of New York's financial elite, brilliant, beautiful, ambitious. Dominic's venture capital firm, Blackwood Ventures, grew exponentially with Arya as his unofficial strategic advisor. When he officially brought her into the company as chief investment officer, the business press hailed them as the Midas couple, with a talent for turning struggling startups into gold. But success, Arya discovered, had a way of revealing true character. As Blackwood Ventures expanded, so did Dominic's need for control. Small disagreements in strategy meetings became tense standoffs. Her decisions were increasingly second-guessed, her authority subtly undermined. "You're too cautious," he told her after she vetoed a high-risk investment he favored. "Sometimes I think you forget whose name is on the building. And sometimes I think you forget we're supposed to be partners," she countered, hurt by the implication. The tension at work began seeping into their personal life. Dominic started attending social events alone, explaining that one of them needed to mind the store. When they did appear together, he increasingly spoke for both of them, interrupting when she expressed opinions that differed from his own. "You're imagining things," he said when she finally confronted him about it. "You're just stressed. Maybe you should cut back your hours." It was the first time Arya felt that cold knot of doubt in her stomach. The first time she wondered if her mother had seen something in Dominic that she had been too in love to recognize. But she pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on their shared dream of starting a family. They had always planned to have children. Dominic spoke often about legacy, about raising heirs who would continue building what they had started. After 3 years of marriage, with Blackwood Ventures firmly established, they decided the time was right. Months passed without success. Then a year. Dominic's initial patience gave way to frustration, then a quiet, simmering resentment. He began scheduling her doctor's appointments without consulting her, researching fertility treatments and presenting them as decisions already made rather than options to consider together. "I don't understand why you're being difficult about this," he said when she objected to an invasive procedure he'd already paid for. "Don't you want a baby? Don't you want to give me a child?" The phrasing struck her as odd. Give him a child, as if the baby would be a gift from her to him, not a person they would create and raise together. But she wanted a family too, so she acquiesced, enduring a battery of tests and treatments that left her feeling more like a defective incubator than a woman, let alone a wife. The breaking point came on a crisp autumn morning in the office of Dr. Melissa Friedman, one of New York's top fertility specialists. Arya and Dominic sat side by side in plush leather chairs, maintaining a careful distance that spoke volumes about the strain between them. Dr. Friedman entered with 2 folders, her expression professionally neutral as she took a seat across from them. "I have the results of all your tests," she began, opening the folders. "Mrs. Blackwood, your results are excellent. Hormone levels, egg quality, uterine lining. Everything looks perfect for conception." Arya felt Dominic tense beside her, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrest. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Friedman continued, turning to the second folder, "I'm afraid your results are less encouraging. Your sperm count is significantly below normal range, and the motility of the sperm that are present is compromised. Natural conception would be extremely unlikely given these parameters. The silence that followed was absolute. Arya reached for Dominic's hand, but he pulled away, his face a rigid mask. "There must be a mistake," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Run the tests again." "We've already run them twice to confirm," Dr. Friedman replied gently. "But there are options we can discuss. Intracytoplasmic sperm injection has excellent success rates in cases like yours. With ICSI, we can select the healthiest sperm and inject it directly into the egg. So you're saying I need technological intervention to do what any man should be able to do naturally?" Dominic's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I'm saying that medical science offers solutions for couples in your situation," Dr. Friedman corrected, her tone remaining professional despite the tension crackling in the room. "Many couples go on to have healthy pregnancies and children with assisted reproductive technology." "Dominic," Arya said softly, trying again to reach for his hand, "this doesn't change anything. We can still have a family." He stood abruptly, straightening his bespoke suit jacket with a sharp tug. "I need some air. I'll meet you at home." Without another word, without even looking at her, he walked out, leaving Arya to face the doctor alone. Dr. Friedman's expression softened with sympathy. "This is often harder on the men," she said, handing Arya some brochures on ICSI and other fertility treatments. "Give him time to process. When you're both ready, come back and we'll discuss next steps." But Dominic wasn't ready to discuss next steps. Not that day, not the next, not for 3 agonizing weeks during which he threw himself into work, coming home long after Arya had gone to bed, leaving before she woke. When she tried to bring up the subject of fertility treatments, he changed the topic or manufactured urgent business calls. When she left brochures on his desk, they disappeared, never mentioned. Then came the morning she found the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. "What is this?" she demanded, storming into his home office where he sat reviewing quarterly reports as if it were any normal day. "I think the document speaks for itself," he replied without looking up. "No, it doesn't. Nothing about this speaks for itself. We had one setback, one challenge, and your response is to throw away our marriage." Dominic finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and what she saw there chilled her to the bone. There was no love, no regret, just cold calculation. "It's not working, Arya. It hasn't been for some time. The fertility issue just made it clear that we want different things." "Different things? We both want children. We can still have them, just not the way we expected. I need a wife who can give me children naturally," he said, the cruelty of his words delivered with such casual indifference that Arya actually took a step back. "It's important for my legacy." "Your legacy?" Arya repeated, disbelief warring with rising anger. "What about our legacy? What about the life we've built together? The company will be fine. The prenup is generous. You'll be well taken care of." "I don't want to be taken care of. I want my husband to talk to me, to work through this with me like the partners we're supposed to be." Dominic sighed, setting down his pen with exaggerated patience. "This isn't a negotiation, Arya. My mind is made up. I've already spoken with the board. Your replacement starts next week." The double blow, losing her marriage and her position at the company she had helped build, left her momentarily speechless. When she found her voice again, it was steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "So that's it? 5 years together, erased because your ego can't handle a medical issue." "It's not about ego," he countered, though the tightening of his jaw suggested otherwise. "It's about compatibility and the future. I've been more than fair financially. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." Arya stared at the stranger before her, trying to reconcile this cold, dismissive man with the one who had once looked at her with such intensity, who had whispered promises of forever against her skin in the darkness of their bedroom. How had she missed this? How had she not seen that his love was conditional, that she was valuable to him only as long as she served his purposes? "You know what, Dominic? You're right about one thing. We are incompatible." because I thought I married a man of integrity and character, someone who understood the meaning of for better or worse. Clearly, I was wrong. She left his office with her head high, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The tears would come later, in private, when the full weight of his betrayal crashed down on her. But in that moment, walking away from the man she had loved with her whole heart, Arya felt something unexpected beneath the pain, the first stirring of liberation. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined as she signed the divorce papers 3 days later, was that she wasn't walking away alone. Inside her, defying medical odds and Dominic's cruel dismissal, 3 tiny lives had already begun to form 3 children who would become her greatest joy and, eventually, the most irrefutable evidence of her ex-husband's lies. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone tried to break you, hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. This story is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens when Arya discovers she's carrying the children her ex-husband claimed she could never have. The first sign that something extraordinary had happened came 6 weeks after Arya moved out of the penthouse she had shared with Dominic. She had rented a modest apartment in Brooklyn, needing distance from Manhattan and the social circles where rumors about her failure as a woman had already begun circulating, courtesy of Dominic's carefully crafted narrative. That morning, she woke with a wave of nausea so intense she barely made it to the bathroom in time. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, she initially attributed it to stress. The divorce had been finalized with brutal efficiency. Her career was in shambles after Dominic had quietly blacklisted her from major financial firms, and she had been subsisting on coffee and whatever takeout she could stomach. But when the nausea returned the next morning, and the next, a different possibility began to form in her mind. It seemed impossible given Dr. Friedman's assessment of Dominic's fertility issues, yet she found herself counting back weeks, realizing that her last period had been just before that fateful doctor's appointment. With shaking hands, she took a pregnancy test, watching in disbelief as 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately. Stunned, she took another, and another. 3 tests, 3 positive results. "This can't be happening," she whispered to her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her face pale with shock. But it was happening. An emergency appointment with an OB/GYN confirmed not only the pregnancy but a revelation that left Arya speechless. She was carrying triplets. 3 heartbeats, the doctor said, pointing to the ultrasound screen where 3 tiny fluttering pulses were clearly visible. Identical twins and a fraternal sibling. Quite rare naturally, especially given the fertility concerns you mentioned. Arya stared at the screen, at the 3 lives growing inside her against all medical probability, and felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. Of course the universe would give her not 1 but 3 children just when her life had fallen apart, just when she was most alone. Her first instinct was to call Dominic. Whatever had happened between them, he deserved to know he was going to be a father. She tried his personal number 17 times over the next 2 days. Each call went straight to voicemail. She left messages urgent, then pleading, then angry. No response. Finally, she called his office, only to be told by his new assistant that Mr. Blackwood has instructed me not to put through any calls from you. If you have matters to discuss, please direct them to his attorney. The dismissal was the final straw. If Dominic couldn't be bothered to take her calls, if he had so thoroughly erased her from his life, then perhaps he didn't deserve to know about the miracle that had occurred. Perhaps these children, her children, were meant to be her new beginning, not a reason to remain tethered to a man who had discarded her so callously. But the decision to keep the pregnancy to herself became more complicated a week later when she opened her laptop to find her social media flooded with a single image. Dominic at a charity gala with a willowy blonde on his arm, his hand possessively at her waist. The caption, from a society columnist known for her vicious pen, read, "Blackwood wastes no time trading up after divorce from barren ex-sources close to the billionaire say he's eager to start a family with someone who can actually give him children." The public humiliation was calculated and cruel. As Arya scrolled through the comments, she saw that Dominic had given an exclusive interview to the columnist, explaining that his marriage had ended because of irreconcilable differences regarding family planning, and expressing his hope that, The next Mrs. Blackwood will be more aligned with traditional values of motherhood. He had taken their private pain, their shared medical challenge, and twisted it into a weapon against her, painting himself as the victim and her as somehow deficient. The betrayal cut deeper than the divorce itself. He knew, Arya whispered, one hand moving protectively to her still flat stomach. He knew it was his issue, not mine, and he deliberately lied to protect his ego. In that moment, something hardened within her. The last lingering threads of love she had felt for Dominic Blackwood burned away, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She would not subject herself or her children to his manipulation and lies. She would build a new life far from his influence, raise these miraculous babies on her own terms, and someday, when they were old enough to understand, when she was strong enough to face him again, she would reveal the truth. The next morning, Arya withdrew the maximum amount from her settlement account, packed 2 suitcases with essentials, and boarded a train to Boston. She had a distant cousin there, Wei Lin, who had always been more like a sister than a relative. If anyone would take her in without questions, it would be Wei. "Stay as long as you need," Wei said that night, helping Arya settle into the guest room of her cozy Cambridge apartment. "But eventually, you'll have to tell me what's really going on. You don't just leave New York without a plan unless you're running from something. Or someone." Arya sighed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "It's complicated." "It usually is," Wei replied with a gentle smile. "But whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." Those words, "you don't have to face it alone," broke the dam Arya had built around her emotions. The tears came in a flood, weeks of grief and shock pouring out as Wei held her, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words in the Mandarin of their childhood. When the storm passed, Arya took a deep breath and placed Wei's hand on her stomach. "I'm pregnant. With triplets." Wei's eyes widened. "Triplets? But I thought." "So did we. Apparently, the doctors were wrong about Dominic's fertility issues. Or there was some kind of miracle. Either way, I'm carrying 3 babies, and their father has no idea they exist." "And you're not going to tell him?" Wei asked, her tone carefully neutral. "I tried. He wouldn't take my calls. And then he went to the press with lies about me being barren, about me being the reason we couldn't have children." Arya's voice hardened. "He doesn't deserve to know them. Not until they're old enough to understand what kind of man he really is." Wei was quiet for a long moment, considering. "That's a big decision, Arya. One with consequences for you and those babies." "I know. But right now, it's the only decision I can make and still protect myself, protect us from him. You don't know Dominic like I do. If he found out about this pregnancy, he wouldn't see 3 children. He'd see 3 possessions, 3 extensions of his ego and legacy. He'd use his money and influence to take them from me, to control the narrative just like he's doing now. Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen," Wei said firmly. "Starting tomorrow, we figure out your next steps. A job, a place to live, medical care. Everything you and those babies will need." True to her word, Wei became Arya's fiercest ally in the months that followed. She connected Arya with a friend who ran a small but respected literary agency in Boston, where Arya's financial acumen and strategic mind quickly made her indispensable despite her lack of publishing experience. She helped Arya find a 2-bedroom apartment within walking distance of the agency and a hospital with an excellent neonatal unit, crucial given the high-risk nature of a triplet pregnancy. Most importantly, Wei stood by Arya through the physical and emotional challenges of carrying 3 babies at once. She attended every doctor's appointment, helped modify the apartment for triplets, and held Arya's hand through moments of doubt when the enormity of single motherhood to 3 infants seemed overwhelming. "You can do this," Wei would say during those dark nights when fear kept Arya awake. "You're the strongest person I know, and you won't be doing it alone." The pregnancy progressed against all odds, the babies growing steadily despite the strain on Arya's petite frame. By the 6th month, she could barely move, confined to bed rest to prevent premature labor. She used the time to work remotely, determined to secure her position at the agency, and to prepare for the children's arrival, researching triplet care, joining online support groups for multiple births, and making detailed plans for every contingency. At 34 weeks, remarkably full term for triplets, Arya gave birth via scheduled C-section to 2 boys and a girl, Oliver, Ethan, and Sophia Winters. She had chosen to use her maiden name for herself and the children, a clean break from the Blackwood legacy. The moment the nurse placed the first tiny bundle in her arms, Arya felt a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. Looking into Oliver's gray eyes, Dominic's eyes, she felt no regret for her decision to keep them from their father. Only certainty that she would do whatever necessary to give these 3 precious beings the stable, loving home they deserved. The first year was a blur of exhaustion and joy, of midnight feedings and first smiles, of moments when Arya thought she couldn't possibly continue and then somehow found the strength to do just that. Wei was a constant presence, as were the friends Arya gradually made through work and a support group for mothers of multiples. Slowly, a community formed around her little family, people who knew nothing of Dominic Blackwood or Arya's former life as half of New York's golden couple. At the agency, Arya's natural talent for spotting promising manuscripts and negotiating favorable contracts quickly elevated her from assistant to agent. By the time the triplets were 2, she had built a respectable client list and earned enough to move them to a 3-bedroom apartment in a family-friendly neighborhood. By their 4th birthday, she had been made partner, with a corner office and the freedom to work flexible hours to accommodate the children's needs. Life settled into a rhythm, challenging but fulfilling, busy but purposeful. Arya watched her children grow from helpless infants to curious toddlers to independent preschoolers with distinct personalities that both delighted and occasionally terrified her. Oliver, the firstborn by 7 minutes, emerged as the natural leader, protective of his siblings and confident in his opinions even at a young age. Sophia, sandwiched between her brothers by 3 minutes, was fiercely intelligent and perceptive, often understanding adult dynamics before her brothers caught on. Ethan, the youngest, was quieter and more thoughtful, observing the world with careful consideration before engaging with it. All 3 inherited their mother's quick mind and their father's determination, a combination that made parenting them both rewarding and exhausting. And all 3, as they grew, began asking the inevitable question, "Where is our dad?" Arya had prepared for this, developing an age-appropriate version of the truth that neither demonized Dominic nor excused his actions. "Your father and I loved each other once," she would tell them, "but we grew apart before I knew you were coming. He moved away, and I haven't spoken to him since before you were born." This satisfied them until they were 7, when Oliver, always the most direct, asked the question Arya had been dreading. "But why didn't you tell him about us after we were born? Didn't he have a right to know?" They were at the breakfast table, a rare quiet moment before school, when he dropped this bombshell. Arya set down her coffee cup, looking at each of her children in turn. They deserved honesty, even if it was difficult. "I tried to tell him when I first found out I was pregnant," she said carefully. "I called him many times, but he wouldn't speak to me. He had moved on with his life and made it clear he didn't want me in it anymore. But we weren't just you," Sophia pointed out with the razor-sharp logic that sometimes made Arya wonder if she was raising a future lawyer. "We were his babies too." "Yes, you were. But sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, and your father had made choices that hurt me very deeply. I was afraid that if he knew about you, he might try to take you away from me, or he might reject you too. I couldn't risk either of those things happening." "Is he a bad person?" Ethan asked quietly, his serious eyes, so like her own, fixed on her face. Arya chose her words with care. "He's not a bad person, but he made bad choices. He wasn't kind or honest when our marriage ended. I needed to protect myself and later, to protect you 3 until you were old enough to understand." "Do we have his last name?" Oliver wanted to know. "No, you have mine. Winters." "What's his name?" Sophia pressed. "His full name." Arya hesitated, then decided that this too was information they deserved. "Dominic Blackwood." The triplets exchanged glances, that silent communication they had developed in the womb and refined over 7 years of shared existence. "Can we meet him someday?" Ethan finally asked, voicing what seemed to be their collective question. "When you're older, if that's what you want, we can discuss it," Arya promised. But he lives in New York, and we're here in Boston. Our lives are very different from his now. The conversation shifted to more immediate concerns. Homework, soccer practice, the class pet, but Arya knew this was just the beginning. The questions would become more specific, more searching as they grew. Eventually, they would want more than the carefully edited version she had given them. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly eventually would arrive, or that it would be catalyzed by a chance discovery when the children were 9. "Mom!" Sophia's voice at her office door pulled Arya from a particularly thorny clause in the contract. "Can we talk to you?" Something in her daughter's tone made Arya immediately save her work and give Sophia her full attention. "Of course, sweetheart. What's up?" "We found something. On the internet." Sophia shifted uncomfortably. "About our father." Arya's heart sank. She had been careful to keep her old life separate from their new one, had avoided social media where Dominic might appear, had even changed her professional name to distance herself from the scandal of their divorce. But the internet was vast, and her children were nothing if not resourceful. "Show me," she said, following Sophia to the living room where Oliver and Ethan sat huddled around a tablet. Oliver looked up as they entered, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. "We were researching famous entrepreneurs for our economics project. I typed in successful venture capitalists and his name came up. Dominic Blackwood." He turned the tablet toward her, and Arya found herself looking at a recent profile of Dominic in Forbes, celebrating Blackwood Ventures' expansion into biotech. The photo showed him looking much as she remembered, perhaps with more silver at his temples, a few more lines around his eyes, but still devastatingly handsome, still radiating that aura of absolute confidence that had once captivated her. But it was the second image that made her blood run cold. Dominic with his arm around a beautiful woman whose pregnant belly was prominently displayed, both of them beaming at the camera. The caption read, "Blackwood and fiancée Vanessa Harlow expecting their first child after years of fertility struggles. The couple plans to marry before their baby's arrival next month." "He's having another baby," Ethan said quietly, "with someone else. And look at this," Sophia added, scrolling down to a quote from Dominic. "After the heartbreak of my first marriage to a woman who couldn't have children, finding Vanessa has been a blessing. We're thrilled to finally be starting the family I've always wanted." The cruelty of the statement, the blatant lie about their fertility issues, hit Arya like a physical blow. Even after all these years, even with a new relationship and a baby on the way, he was still perpetuating the narrative that she had been the problem, that her supposed barrenness had deprived him of fatherhood. "He's lying," Oliver said flatly, his gray eyes, so like Dominic's, flashing with indignation. "The doctor said it was him who had the fertility problem, not you. You told us that." "Yes," Arya confirmed, finding her voice despite the shock. "That's what the doctor told us." "So he's been telling everyone a lie about you for years?" Sophia's outrage was palpable. "And now he's going to be a father to this new baby when he doesn't even know about us? That's not fair," Ethan added, his quiet voice carrying the weight of hurt that all three seemed to be feeling. Arya looked at her children. These miraculous beings who had defied medical odds to exist, who had been her salvation in the darkest period of her life, and saw the confusion and pain in their eyes. They deserved better than to discover their father's public rejection of their mother, his erasure of their very possibility, through an internet search. "You're right," she said finally. "It's not fair. And yes, he's been telling a lie that protected his pride at the expense of the truth." "Why would he do that?" Ethan asked, the question that always cut to the heart of things. Arya sighed, sitting down on the couch and gesturing for the triplets to join her. "Some people, especially people with a lot of power and success like your father, build their lives around a certain image of themselves. When something challenges that image, like finding out he had fertility issues, it can feel like their whole identity is threatened. Instead of accepting the truth and working through it, they reject it. They create a different story that's easier for them to live with. Even if that story hurts someone else?" Sophia pressed. "Even then," Arya confirmed sadly. "It's not right, but it's how some people cope with things that make them feel vulnerable or less than perfect." Does he know about us now? Oliver asked. Has he been looking for us all this time? The hope in his voice broke Arya's heart. No, sweetheart. As far as I know, he still doesn't know you exist. And he hasn't been looking for us. The triplets fell silent, processing this difficult truth. Finally, Sophia spoke up, her voice determined despite the slight quiver in it. I think we should meet him, before his new baby comes. He should know about us. Oliver nodded vigorously. Yeah, he should have to face the truth. That he was wrong about you not being able to have kids. And that we exist, Ethan added quietly. That we're real people, not just some idea. Arya looked at her children, surprised by their unified front but also by the maturity of their reasoning. They didn't just want to meet their father out of curiosity or a sense of completion. They wanted justice for their mother, acknowledgement of their own existence, truth in place of the lies that had shaped their family story. Meeting your father would be a big step, she said carefully. One that would change all our lives. I need you to understand that he might not react the way you hope. He might be angry or confused, or he might try to deny that you're his children. We look just like him, Oliver pointed out pragmatically. Especially me and Sophia. We have his eyes exactly. And if he denies it, we can get a DNA test. Sophia added with the confidence of a child who had watched too many crime shows. They do that on TV all the time. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Arya couldn't help but smile at her daughter's practical approach. Yes, DNA tests are an option. But meeting your father isn't just about proving he's biologically related to you. It's about opening a door that can't be closed again. Once he knows about you, he becomes part of your lives in some way, even if that way is complicated or difficult. But he already is part of our lives, Ethan observed with his characteristic insight. We think about him. We wonder about him. We have his DNA. The only difference is that right now, it's all one-sided. Arya was continually amazed by her children's emotional intelligence, their ability to articulate complex feelings that many adults struggled to name. It was one of the unexpected gifts of raising triplets. They had developed a heightened awareness of interpersonal dynamics from navigating their three-way relationship from birth. You're right, she acknowledged, and you're old enough now to have a say in this decision. But I need time to think about how we might approach this. Your father is a powerful man with resources and influence. We need to be careful about how and when we reveal your existence to him. The triplets exchanged one of their silent communications, then nodded in unison. Okay, Oliver said, speaking for all three as he often did. But don't take too long. His new baby is coming next month. That night, after the children were asleep, Arya sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine and her laptop, doing something she had avoided for nearly a decade, researching Dominic Blackwood's current life. What she found both surprised her and confirmed her worst suspicions. Blackwood Ventures had expanded exponentially, with offices in New York, London, and Singapore. Dominic himself had become something of a celebrity CEO, his ruthless business acumen and photogenic appearance making him a favorite subject for business and society publications alike. His relationship with Vanessa Harlow, a former model-turned-sustainable fashion entrepreneur, had been heavily documented over the past 2 years. Their fertility journey, as the press called it, had been shared in carefully curated social media posts and exclusive interviews, always with the underlying narrative that Vanessa had finally succeeded where Dominic's ex-wife had failed. The most recent post, from just a week earlier, showed Vanessa cradling her prominent baby bump with the caption, "Grateful to have found a partner who can give me the one thing I've always wanted." Some women are truly blessed with fertility, while others, #miraclebaby, #fertile love. The thinly veiled dig at Arya was unmistakable, suggesting Vanessa knew exactly who she was and had bought into Dominic's false narrative completely. The calculated cruelty of it, the public flaunting of a pregnancy specifically positioned as a triumph over Arya's supposed inadequacy, made her decision suddenly clear. For years, she had protected Dominic from the consequences of his lies, had allowed him to control the narrative about their marriage and its end. She had done so initially out of self-preservation, then out of a desire to shield her children from the ugliness of their father's rejection. But in doing so, she had inadvertently become complicit in his deception, allowing him to build a new life on a foundation of lies while she and the triplets lived in the shadow of those lies. It was time for the truth. Not out of vengeance, though God knew there had been times in those early years when she had fantasized about exposing him, but for her children, who deserved to know their father and to be acknowledged by him. For herself, who had carried the weight of his falsehoods for too long. And yes, even for Dominic, who had constructed an elaborate fiction that would eventually collapse under its own weight. The question was how to reveal the truth in a way that protected the triplets from the worst of the fallout. A direct confrontation seemed unwise. Dominic was at his most dangerous when cornered, and she had no doubt he would deploy his considerable resources to control the situation if given advance warning. No, this needed to be public enough that he couldn't simply deny it or bury it, but controlled enough that the children weren't exposed to unnecessary drama. And it needed to happen soon, before the birth of his new child complicated matters further. The answer came to her as she scrolled through her email, finding the invitation she had initially deleted without a second thought. The Harvard Business School 10-year reunion, scheduled for the following weekend in New York. According to the alumni newsletter, Dominic was not only attending but giving a keynote address on building a legacy in business and life. The irony was almost too perfect. A man speaking about legacy who had no idea that his true legacy, 3 remarkable children, would be in the same room, living proof of the lie he had built his life upon. It was risky. It would be emotionally challenging for everyone involved. But it would also be undeniable, immediate, and would give Dominic no opportunity to prepare a defense or counter-narrative. The triplets would be seen by everyone who had heard his lies about Arya's fertility, and the truth would be written in their faces, in the gray eyes and determined chins that mirrored their father's so precisely. The next morning, Arya called Wei, who had remained her closest confidant despite moving to Chicago for work 3 years earlier. "I need your honest opinion," she said after explaining her plan. "Am I crazy to do this? Am I putting the kids at risk emotionally?" Wei was quiet for a moment, considering. "It's definitely dramatic," she finally said. "But maybe that's what's needed here. Dominic has been controlling the narrative for a decade. A quiet, private approach would just give him time to spin this his way too. That's what I was thinking. But the children are remarkably resilient and mature for their age," Wei finished. "And they've been raised by a mother who's taught them their worth isn't determined by anyone else's acceptance or rejection. They'll handle this better than most adults would." "I hope you're right," Arya sighed. "Because once we do this, there's no going back." "There's already no going back, Arya. The moment they found that article, your carefully constructed separation from Dominic began to crumble. Better to control how the truth comes out than have it emerge in ways you can't manage." After hanging up, Arya called the reunion committee to confirm her attendance, plus 3 guests. Then she sat the triplets down for a serious conversation about what she was proposing. "It would mean missing 2 days of school," she explained. "We'd fly to New York on Friday, attend the reunion Saturday evening, and fly home Sunday. Would we stay in a fancy hotel?" Oliver wanted to know, practical as always. "Yes, I've already looked into the Grand Meridian. It's where most of the reunion attendees will be staying, including your father." "Will his pregnant fiancée be there?" Sophia asked, her perceptiveness cutting straight to a complication Arya had been considering. "Probably. These events usually include partners." "Good," Sophia said with a determination that momentarily startled Arya. "She should see us too. She's been saying mean things about you online." "You saw those?" Arya hadn't realized the children had delved that deeply into their internet research. "We saw everything," Ethan confirmed quietly. "All the interviews where he talks about you not being able to have babies. All her posts about being fertile, unlike some people." Arya felt a surge of protective anger. Her children had been exposed to the cruel narrative Dominic and Vanessa had constructed, had read strangers discussing their mother's supposed reproductive failings. It was exactly what she had tried to shield them from all these years. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said, reaching out to squeeze Ethan's hand. Those posts and interviews, they're not about the truth. They're about creating a story that makes your father and his fiancée feel better about themselves. That's why we need to go to the reunion, Oliver insisted, to show everyone the real truth. It won't be easy, Arya cautioned. There will be a lot of people watching. Your father might be angry or shocked. He might say things that are hurtful. We know, Sophia said with a maturity beyond her years. But we've talked about it and we want to do this. We want him to know we exist. Arya looked at her 3 children. These remarkable beings who had come into the world against all odds and who had been her strength, her purpose, her joy for 9 years. They were ready for this confrontation, perhaps more ready than she was herself. All right, she agreed. We'll go to New York. We'll attend the reunion. And we'll finally introduce you to your father. The week that followed was a flurry of preparation. Arya took the triplets shopping for appropriate attire, their first formal clothes, which they approached with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Oliver was particular about his suit, insisting on a specific shade of blue that looks more professional. Sophia fell in love with a deep purple dress that complemented her olive complexion. Ethan, less concerned with fashion, nevertheless lit up when he found a bow tie patterned with tiny books, a nod to his passion for reading. Arya herself splurged on a midnight blue gown that she knew would turn heads, not out of vanity, but because she understood the power of presentation in the world they were about to enter. Dominic had always been acutely aware of image, of the messages sent by clothing and accessories. She wanted him to see not just his children, but the woman she had become without him. Confident, successful, undiminished by his rejection. They flew to New York on Friday afternoon, the triplets buzzing with a mixture of excitement about the trip and nervousness about its purpose. For Arya, returning to the city she had fled a decade earlier brought a complex wave of emotions. Nostalgia for the life she had once loved, anger at how it had ended, pride in the strength she had found in its aftermath. The Grand Meridian was exactly the kind of luxury hotel Dominic preferred. All marble surfaces and impeccable service. As they checked into their suite, Arya caught herself scanning the lobby, half expecting to see him despite knowing he would likely arrive later, closer to the reunion itself. "Is this where you used to live?" Sophia asked as they explored the lavish suite with its panoramic views of Central Park. "No, your father and I had a penthouse on the Upper East Side," Arya explained. "But we attended many events in hotels like this. Did you like it?" Ethan wanted to know. "Living like this, I mean." Arya considered the question thoughtfully. Parts of it, yes. The beauty, the comfort, the ease of having anything you wanted just a phone call away. But other parts were harder, the constant pressure to look perfect, to say the right things, to maintain a certain image. It wasn't always real. "Our apartment is real," Oliver said decisively. "It's better." Arya smiled, touched by his loyalty. "It is real, and that makes it special in ways all the luxury in the world can't match." They spent Saturday morning exploring the city, Arya showing the triplets some of her favorite places from her previous life. The Museum of Natural History, which Ethan particularly loved, Central Park, where Oliver was fascinated by the chess players, and a small dim sum restaurant in Chinatown that had been her secret refuge during difficult times in her marriage, where Sophia delighted in trying every dumpling on the menu. As the day progressed, however, a nervous energy began to build. By late afternoon, as they returned to the hotel to prepare for the evening, even Oliver's usual confidence seemed slightly dimmed. "What if he doesn't like us?" he asked as Arya helped him with his tie, the vulnerability in his voice a rare crack in his self-assured facade. "Then that would be his loss," Arya replied firmly. "But remember, his reaction, whatever it is, isn't about you. It's about him and his ability to handle the truth. You 3 are amazing, brilliant, wonderful children. Anyone would be lucky to know you, including your father. But what if he's mean to you again?" Sophia worried, perched on the edge of the bed in her purple dress, legs swinging nervously. "I can handle it," Arya assured her. "I'm not the same person I was when I left New York. I'm stronger now because of you 3. "We've got your back, Mom," Ethan said quietly, adjusting his glasses with solemn determination. Arya felt her heart swell with love for these remarkable children who, even in their anxiety about meeting their father, were concerned for her well-being. "And I've got yours," she promised. "Always." At 7 o'clock, they gathered in the suite's living room for a final check. The triplets stood side by side, three distinct personalities united by the unmistakable genetic heritage that linked them to the man they were about to meet. Arya felt a momentary pang of doubt. Was she doing the right thing? Was this the right way to introduce them to their father? But then she remembered Dominic's cruel public statements, Vanessa's taunting social media posts, the hurt in her children's eyes when they discovered the lies that had been told about their mother. This confrontation was long overdue. "Ready?" she asked, looking at each child in turn. 3 nods, 3 expressions of nervous determination. "Remember," she said as they headed for the door, "whatever happens tonight, we face it together, as a family." The elevator ride to the ballroom level was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the grand double doors where a sign announced Harvard Business School reunion, Arya felt a tremor of anxiety. Somewhere beyond those doors was Dominic, still unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to be irrevocably changed. "Wait here with Aunt Margot," she instructed the triplets, nodding to her friend who had flown in from Chicago specifically to support them through this evening. "I'll go in first, get the lay of the land. When the time is right, Margot will bring you in." Margot, elegant in a silver sheath dress, gave Arya's hand a reassuring squeeze. "We've got this. Go show them what resilience looks like." With a deep breath, Arya stepped through the doors into the glittering ballroom. The scene was exactly as she had expected. Hundreds of successful Harvard alumni in formal attire, networking over champagne and canapes, the air thick with ambition and accomplishment. Her eyes scanned the crowd, seeking the one face she had both dreaded and needed to see. And there he was, near the bar, commanding attention as he always had. Dominic Blackwood, even more handsome than in his photos, his tall frame impeccably suited, his dark hair now distinguished with silver at the temples. Beside him stood Vanessa, her pregnancy prominently displayed in a designer gown, her hand possessively resting on the swell of her belly as she gazed adoringly up at him. The champagne flute trembled slightly in Arya's hand as she stood at the entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom. 10 years. 10 years since she'd walked these marble floors, since she'd breathed the rarefied air of Manhattan's elite social circles. 10 years since she'd last seen him. "Are you sure about this?" whispered Margot, her closest friend and tonight's self-appointed guardian. "We can still leave. No one's spotted us yet." Arya took a steadying breath, smoothing the midnight blue gown that complemented her figure perfectly, a designer piece she'd purchased specifically for this evening. As the founder and CEO of Winter's Literary Agency, one of New York's fastest-growing boutique agencies with a reputation for discovering breakout authors, she could afford such luxuries now. But tonight wasn't about displaying her success. It was about something far more important. "I'm sure," she replied, her eyes fixed on the ballroom beyond. "The children are ready. Some things can't be avoided forever." As if summoned by her resolve, the crowd near the bar parted, and there he was, Dominic Blackwood, looking exactly as she remembered and yet somehow more powerful, more commanding, more everything that had once drawn her to him like a moth to destructive flame. At 42, Dominic had only grown more devastating with time. His 6'3" frame carried the bespoke Armani with the casual arrogance of a man who had never questioned his place at the top of the world. His dark hair, now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, was still thick and perfectly styled. And his eyes, those piercing gray eyes that had once looked at her with such intensity, were currently focused on the woman beside him, her hand possessively resting on the pronounced swell of her belly beneath a designer gown. Vanessa Harlow, the woman who had succeeded where Arya had failed. The woman whose pregnancy Dominic had flaunted across social media with pointed captions about finally finding a fertile partner and building a legacy with someone who could actually give him children. The cruelty had been deliberate, calculated to wound. "Breathe," Margot reminded her, squeezing her arm. Remember why you're here. Yes, remember why. Not for revenge, though God knew she'd fantasized about it during those first bitter years. Not for closure. She'd found that on her own, painfully but thoroughly. No, she was here because some truths couldn't remain hidden forever, especially when they came in sets of 3. The Harvard Business School 10-year reunion buzzed around her, a hive of success and ambition, of deals made and fortunes compared. Once, she had belonged here, had been half of the golden couple everyone envied. Brilliant Aria Winters and ruthless Dominic Blackwood, bound for greatness together. Until the day the fertility specialist had delivered the news that shattered their world, or so she'd thought. Your tests show no issues, Mrs. Blackwood, the doctor had said. But I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood's sperm count and motility are severely compromised. Natural conception would be extremely unlikely. Dominic had walked out of the office without a word. 3 weeks of silence had followed, weeks of Aria researching options, scheduling consultations with specialists, preparing to fight for their future together. Then came the divorce papers, the cruel words, the public humiliation as he systematically rewrote their history, casting her as the barren, defective wife he'd magnanimously tried to love despite her failure as a woman. Aria? Aria Winters. A woman's voice broke through her thoughts. Oh my God! It is you! Turning, Aria found herself face to face with Rebecca Thornton, now apparently Rebecca Westfield according to her name tag, once her closest friend in business school before life and distance had pulled them apart. Rebecca! Aria managed a genuine smile. You look amazing. And you disappeared. One day you were here, the next, poof, gone without a trace. Rebecca's eyes darted briefly toward Dominic across the room, then back to Aria. We all wondered, especially after the things he said. It's a long story, Aria said, the understatement of the decade. One you'll understand much better in about 15 minutes. Rebecca raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Mysterious. But first, catch me up. I've heard your agency is making waves. Didn't you just sign that thriller writer everyone's talking about? James Mercer, yes. His manuscript started a bidding war. We closed a 7-figure deal last month. Aria allowed herself a moment of professional pride. The agency has grown faster than I ever expected. 20 employees now, offices in New York and London. That's incredible, Rebecca said with genuine admiration. From what Dominic implied when you left, I thought, that I'd fade into obscurity without him? Aria finished with a wry smile. He thought so too. Before Rebecca could respond, a ripple moved through the crowd as Dominic's commanding voice rose above the general chatter. He was tapping a knife against his glass, the universal signal for an announcement. Beside him, Vanessa beamed, one hand resting protectively over her belly, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Aria. A flash of recognition, followed by a smug smile. She knew exactly who Aria was, had probably studied her social media photos, dissected her history with Dominic, positioned herself as everything Aria supposedly wasn't. Friends and colleagues, Dominic began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. Thank you all for coming tonight. Harvard gave us more than just an education. It gave us connections that have shaped our careers and our lives. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. As many of you know, Blackwood Ventures has become the leading investment firm in emerging biotech. What you may not know is that we're about to announce a major expansion into medical technology specifically focused on fertility treatments. Aria felt her heart rate accelerate. The irony was almost too perfect. This is a deeply personal project for me, Dominic continued, his hand coming to rest on Vanessa's shoulder. Vanessa and I are expecting our first child in 3 months. Our miracle after years of trying. The crowd broke into applause and congratulations. Aria remained perfectly still, her face a careful mask. We've been blessed with this pregnancy after struggling with fertility issues. Dominic went on, his voice taking on the practiced sincerity he'd always used for important presentations. And we want to help other couples experience the joy we're feeling now. Blackwood Fertility Technologies will launch next quarter with $100 million in initial funding. More applause. More congratulations. Arya felt Margot's hand tighten on her arm. Now or never, Margot whispered. Arya nodded almost imperceptibly, then handed her champagne flute to her friend. With measured steps, she began moving through the crowd toward the door, deliberately choosing a path that would take her directly past Dominic and his pregnant fiancée. She was 3 steps away when he saw her. The recognition wasn't immediate. A flicker of confusion, then dawning realization, then utter shock washing across features that rarely betrayed any emotion at all. His speech faltered mid-sentence as their eyes locked for the first time in a decade. Arya. The name escaped him like a question, like a ghost had materialized in the middle of his triumph. Hello, Dominic, she said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. Congratulations on your announcement. Both announcements, actually. Vanessa stepped closer to Dominic, her smile sharpening. You must be the ex-wife. I've seen your pictures. Her hand moved deliberately to her belly. Dominic has told me all about your situation. I'm sure he has, Arya replied evenly, though I doubt his version bears much resemblance to the truth. The truth? Dominic recovered quickly, his professional mask sliding back into place. The truth is that you couldn't give me what I needed, and Vanessa could. It's as simple as that. Is it? Arya tilted her head slightly. How interesting that after all your tests showing your infertility, you've managed to father a child. Modern medicine truly is miraculous. Dominic's face hardened. That was a misdiagnosis, obviously. She could see the calculations running behind his eyes, how to minimize this unexpected disruption, how to control the narrative, how to dismiss her presence as quickly as possible. It's good of you to be so gracious, Vanessa said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. It can't be easy, seeing what you couldn't provide. The cruelty was so naked, so deliberate, that a small hush fell over those close enough to hear. Arya felt rather than saw Rebecca step closer to her side in silent support. Actually, Arya replied, her voice clear enough to carry to the curious onlookers, I should be thanking you both. If Dominic hadn't been so quick to discard me over a medical issue that turned out to be his, not mine, I might never have discovered what truly mattered. She turned slightly toward the ballroom entrance and nodded. The doors opened, and 3 impeccably dressed 9-year-olds entered, escorted by Margot who had slipped away moments earlier. 2 boys and a girl, all with Dominic's unmistakable gray eyes, all carrying themselves with a confidence that was both inherited and nurtured. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the children approached. The resemblance was undeniable. The girl had Dominic's aristocratic nose and determined chin, while the boys shared his height and bearing, though one had Arya's warm complexion and the other her thoughtful expression. Dominic, Arya said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. I'd like you to meet Oliver, Sophia, and Ethan, your children. The color drained from Dominic's face as he stared at the 3 children standing before him, living proof that everything he'd claimed about Arya, everything he'd built his narrative upon, had been a lie. That's not possible, he said, his voice barely audible. You would have told me, would I? After you publicly humiliated me, claiming I was barren when you knew it was your issue? After you told everyone who would listen that I wasn't a real woman, because I couldn't have children. Arya kept her voice low but firm. I tried to tell you, Dominic. I called you 17 times after I found out. You never called back. Vanessa was staring at the children, her smug expression completely gone, replaced by shock and dawning horror as she recognized Dominic's features mirrored in their young faces. Hello, Sophia said, stepping forward with the confidence that had always marked her as her father's daughter despite never having met him. I'm Sophia Winters. It's interesting to finally meet you. Dominic seemed incapable of speech, his gaze moving from one child to the next, taking in the details that no DNA test would ever need to confirm. They were undeniably his. You're lying, he finally managed, but the words lacked conviction. This is some kind of trick. Is it? Oliver asked, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had made Dominic a feared negotiator. We're 9 years old. Mom left you 10 years ago. The math isn't complicated. Ethan, always the quietest and most observant of the three, simply studied Dominic with curious eyes. You look exactly like the pictures, he finally said, except older. The crowd around them had fallen completely silent, the reunion temporarily forgotten as the drama unfolded. Vanessa's hand had dropped from her belly, her expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, a dawning anger as she looked between Dominic and the children. You told me you couldn't have children, she hissed at Dominic, that it was her who was infertile, not you. I thought, Dominic began, but Vanessa cut him off. You thought what? That you could lie about something this fundamental? That it would never come out? Her voice rose with each question. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Arya felt a momentary pang of sympathy for the woman. Whatever else Vanessa might be, she too had been deceived by Dominic's carefully constructed narrative. Children, Arya said gently. Why don't we give Mr. Blackwood and Ms. Harlow a moment to process this? There's a chocolate fountain at the dessert table that I think you should investigate. The triplets nodded, their curiosity momentarily outweighed by the promise of chocolate. As they moved away with Margot, Arya turned back to Dominic, whose shock was rapidly transforming into something else. Calculation, assessment, the businessman in him already trying to determine how to turn this situation to his advantage. Why now? He asked, his voice low and controlled once more. After all these years, why bring them here, like this? Because they asked to meet you, Arya replied simply. And because I was tired of hiding the truth to protect your lies. You could have approached me privately. Like you approached me privately when you told the world I was barren? When you made me the subject of pity and gossip. Arya shook her head. You chose the battlefield, Dominic. Don't complain about the weapons. Vanessa had stepped away, her face flushed with anger and humiliation, surrounded now by concerned friends who were casting glances back at Dominic that ranged from curious to condemning. Those children, Dominic said, his voice dropping further. If they're really mine, they are. Then they're Blackwood's. They should have my name, my legacy. Arya laughed, the sound genuine in its disbelief. Is that really your first thought? Not, I've missed 9 years of their lives, or, I want to know them as people? Just ownership and legacy. You kept them from me? He countered, anger finally breaking through his controlled facade. You had no right. I had every right after what you did, Arya replied, her own anger flaring briefly before she mastered it. But that's not the point anymore. The point is that they exist, they're extraordinary, and they deserve better than a father who sees them as possessions or achievements. Dominic's gaze drifted to where the triplets stood by the dessert table, Sophia gesturing animatedly while her brothers listened, their resemblance to him unmistakable from this distance too. I want to know them, he said finally, something almost like vulnerability crossing his features. Whatever happened between us, they're my children. Yes, they are, Arya agreed. And they want to know you too, but on their terms, not yours. They're people, Dominic, not extensions of your ego or solutions to your legacy concerns. For a moment, something like genuine emotion flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or the first stirrings of paternal feeling. But before he could respond, Vanessa returned, her composure partially restored but her eyes cold with fury. We're leaving, she announced to Dominic. Now, we'll discuss this at home. Dominic hesitated, looking between Vanessa and the children across the room. For perhaps the first time in his life, he seemed genuinely torn between two paths, neither of which he controlled. Go, Arya said quietly. Deal with your current situation. The children and I are staying at the Grand Meridian until Sunday. Room 1214. If you want to meet them properly, come tomorrow at 10. Alone. She didn't wait for his response, simply turned and walked toward her children. Her head high, her steps measured. Behind her, she could feel the weight of his stare, could almost hear the frantic recalibration of his carefully constructed world. Well, Margot asked as Arya joined them at the dessert table. How did that go? About as expected, Arya replied, accepting a napkin from Ethan to wipe a smudge of chocolate from his cheek. He's in shock, angry, calculating, and confused, probably for the first time in his adult life. Will he come tomorrow? Sophia asked, her perceptiveness as always cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Arya looked at her daughter, so like Dominic in her directness, yet tempered with an empathy he had always lacked. I don't know, sweetheart. That's his choice now. I think he will, Oliver said confidently. He looked at us like we were valuable assets he'd just discovered in his portfolio. Arya couldn't help but laugh at the accuracy of her son's assessment. That's very perceptive, Ollie, and possibly true. But remember what we discussed, you three are not assets or possessions. You're people with your own thoughts, feelings, and choices. If he comes tomorrow, you can ask your questions, but you don't owe him anything. Not even if he tries to buy us with promises of inheritance and trust funds? Ethan asked quietly, always the most pragmatic of the three. Especially not then, Arya replied firmly. Money is the easiest thing for him to offer. It costs him nothing emotionally. As they spoke, the reunion continued around them, but with a distinctly different energy. Whispers spread through the crowd, curious glances thrown their way, former classmates suddenly finding reasons to pass by the dessert table for a closer look at the children who had just appended the carefully constructed narrative of Dominic Blackwood's life. Rebecca approached, her expression a mixture of awe and admiration. Triplets? All this time, you've been raising triplets on your own. Not entirely on my own, Arya smiled. I have amazing friends, a supportive community. But yes, they've been my world for 9 years. They're beautiful, Rebecca said, then lowered her voice. And they look exactly like him. There's no denying it. That was rather the point, Arya admitted. Some truths need to be seen to be believed. Rebecca glanced toward the exit where Dominic and Vanessa were making a hasty departure, their body language tense even from a distance. Well, you certainly made an impression. I don't think I've ever seen Dominic Blackwood speechless before. It was quite satisfying, Margot chimed in with a grin. Worth the price of admission alone. As the evening progressed, Arya found herself surrounded by former classmates, some genuinely interested in reconnecting, others transparently curious about the drama they'd witnessed. Through it all, she maintained her composure, neither gloating over Dominic's discomfort nor sharing details that would turn her children's existence into gossip fodder. The triplets, for their part, handled the attention with remarkable grace. Years of being raised by a mother who valued emotional intelligence alongside academic achievement had prepared them well for navigating complex social situations. They answered questions politely but deflected anything too personal, a skill Arya had deliberately cultivated in them, knowing this day would eventually come. By 11, the children were showing signs of fatigue despite their excitement, and Arya made their excuses to leave. As they walked through the lobby toward the elevators, Sophia slipped her hand into her mother's. Do you think we hurt her? She asked quietly. The pregnant lady? Arya squeezed her daughter's hand, touched by her empathy. Vanessa? Probably, but that wasn't our intention, and it wasn't your fault. Sometimes when adults build relationships on lies, innocent people get caught in the fallout. She looked really mad at him, Oliver observed. Like, divorce-level mad. That's not our concern, Arya replied firmly. Whatever happens between them is their business, not ours. But if they break up because of us, Ethan began. Not because of you, Arya interrupted gently. Because of choices your father made long before tonight. Never take responsibility for the consequences of adult decisions that weren't yours. In the presidential suite, as the children prepared for bed, Arya found herself standing at the window, looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. 10 years ago, she had fled the city with nothing but heartbreak and 3 tiny lives growing inside her. She'd been terrified, furious, devastated, but also, in a way she couldn't articulate then, free. Free from Dominic's controlling presence, from his subtle undermining of her confidence, from the constant pressure to be the perfect corporate wife while sublimating her own ambitions. The pregnancy, discovered just weeks after their separation, had initially seemed like the universe's cruelest joke, leaving her alone with the very thing Dominic had claimed to want more than anything. But those 3 children had become her salvation, her joy, her purpose, and the necessity of providing for them had pushed her to build something entirely her own, something that had flourished beyond her wildest expectations. "Mom!" Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom the boys were sharing, already in his pajamas, his glasses slightly askew. "Are you okay?" Arya smiled, crossing the room to straighten his glasses. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart. I'm proud of all of us." "Even though it was kind of dramatic?" he asked, his serious expression so like her own that it made her heart ache with love. "Sometimes the truth needs a little drama to be heard," she replied, kissing his forehead. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow might be a big day." After all 3 children were settled, Arya poured herself a glass of wine and joined Margot on the suite's balcony. The night air was cool but not uncomfortable. The city sounds a distant hum below them. "Well," Margot said, raising her own glass in a toast. "Mission accomplished. You certainly made your point." "It wasn't about making a point," Arya replied, though she couldn't entirely suppress a smile. "It was about the truth. The truth that you're not barren, that he's the one with fertility issues, and that you've raised 3 amazing kids while building a successful business without him." Margot arched an eyebrow. That truth, Arya acknowledged with a small laugh. "Plus the truth that the children deserved to know their father, and he deserved to know they exist, even if he doesn't deserve them. Do you think he'll show up tomorrow?" Arya considered the question, swirling the wine in her glass. "Yes, his ego won't allow him not to. The question is what version of Dominic will appear, the businessman looking to acquire new assets, or something closer to an actual father." "And Vanessa? That was quite a bombshell for her too." "I feel bad about that," Arya admitted. "She's not innocent. The way she flaunted that pregnancy knowing who I was, the things she said tonight, but she's also a victim of his lies. I hope she makes better choices than I did at her age." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the wine and the night air softening the edges of the evening's intensity. Finally, Margot spoke again, her tone more serious. "Are you prepared for him to want a relationship with them? A real one? Because if he does, we'll navigate it," Arya said firmly. "I've never wanted to keep them from having a father. I just wanted to protect them from having the wrong version of him as their father. And if he tries to take them from you, legally, he has the resources. Let him try." Arya's voice hardened slightly. "I've documented everything from the beginning. His abandonment, his lies about my fertility, his complete lack of interest or support for a decade. No judge would give him custody, and he knows it. The best he can hope for is visitation, which I'd grant anyway if the children want it." Margot nodded, satisfied with the answer. "You've thought of everything." "I've had 9 years to prepare for this moment," Arya replied with a small smile. "And 3 very good reasons to get it right." The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the suite's windows as Arya supervised breakfast. The children were uncharacteristically quiet, each processing the previous night's events in their own way. Oliver methodically arranged his fruit in precise patterns before eating it, a habit that emerged when he was anxious. Sophia kept glancing at the clock, her leg bouncing under the table. Ethan had brought a book to breakfast, hiding behind it though Arya noticed he hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. At precisely 9:58, a knock came at the door. 3 heads snapped up in perfect unison, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Arya took a deep breath, smoothed her casual but elegant weekend attire, and moved to answer it. Dominic stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed as always, but with subtle signs of strain around his eyes that only someone who had once known him intimately would notice. He had clearly not slept well. "You came," Arya said simply, stepping back to allow him entry. "Did you doubt I would?" he replied, his voice carefully controlled as he stepped into the suite. "Honestly, yes. The Dominic I knew would have sent lawyers rather than face this himself. Something flickered across his face, perhaps recognition of the truth in her words. I'm not the same man I was 10 years ago. For their sake, I hope that's true, Arya said quietly, then turned toward the dining area. Children, your father is here. The triplets rose from the table with the careful poise Arya had instilled in them, moving to stand side by side in the living room area. Up close, in the clear morning light, the resemblance to Dominic was even more striking. Not just in their features, but in the way Oliver stood with his shoulders back, the analytical gaze Sophia fixed on her father, the careful reserve in Ethan's posture. Hello, Dominic said. His usual commanding tone softened by what might have been nervousness. I'm very glad to meet you all properly. Are you? Sophia asked directly, tilting her head in a gesture so like his own that Dominic blinked in surprise. You didn't seem glad last night. You seemed angry. I was shocked, Dominic admitted after a moment's hesitation. Finding out you exist, all three of you, was unexpected. Because you thought Mom couldn't have children, Oliver stated flatly. Even though the doctor said it was you who had the fertility problem. Dominic's jaw tightened briefly before he mastered his expression. Medical issues can be complicated. Misunderstandings happen. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Ethan said quietly, speaking for the first time. Mom has all the medical records. It was a lie. The directness of the children seemed to catch Dominic off guard. He glanced at Arya, who merely raised an eyebrow, offering no assistance. This was his conversation to navigate. You're right, he said finally, surprising Arya with his honesty. It was a lie I told so many times I almost believed it myself. It was easier than accepting the truth. That you couldn't have children? Sophia pressed. That I couldn't have children naturally, Dominic corrected, which made me feel less, and I didn't handle those feelings well. But you're having a baby now, Oliver pointed out, with that lady from last night. Through medical intervention, Dominic explained, his discomfort with the topic evident. Very expensive, very advanced procedures. The same procedures you could have used with Mom, Sophia concluded, her perception razor-sharp. But you chose to leave her instead. Dominic looked genuinely taken aback by the child's insight. It was more complicated than that. Was it? Arya couldn't help interjecting. Or was it that your ego couldn't handle the medical reality? So you rewrote the narrative to make it my failure instead of yours? A tense silence followed her words. The children watched this exchange with the careful attention of young people who had grown up understanding that adult relationships contained complexities beyond their experience. I made mistakes, Dominic finally said, addressing the children rather than Arya. Serious ones. I hurt your mother deeply, and in doing so, I lost the chance to know you from the beginning. That's something I'll have to live with. It was perhaps the most genuine thing Arya had ever heard him say, an admission of fault without qualification or deflection. The children seemed to sense it too, their postures relaxing slightly. What happens now? Ethan asked, practical as always. That depends, Dominic replied, looking at each child in turn. I would like to get to know you, all of you, if you're willing. As your secret children? Oliver asked bluntly. Or publicly? Oliver, Arya cautioned, but Dominic held up a hand. It's a fair question, he said. And the answer is publicly. You're my children. I won't hide that. What about your fiancé? Sophia asked. And your new baby? Where do we fit with them? Dominic hesitated, and Arya could see him weighing his words carefully. Vanessa and I have a lot to discuss. The situation is complicated. But my relationship with you is separate from that. You're my children, regardless of what happens between Vanessa and me. Mom said we don't have to see you if we don't want to, Ethan said quietly. That it's our choice. Your mother is right, Dominic replied, surprising Arya again. I would very much like to be part of your lives, but I haven't earned the right to demand that. I can only ask for the chance. The triplets exchanged glances, communicating in that silent way they had developed in the womb and refined over 9 years of shared existence. Finally, Sophia, their usual spokesperson, turned back to Dominic. "We'd like to know you," she said carefully, but slowly, "and Mom has to be okay with everything." "Of course," Dominic agreed immediately. "Whatever makes you comfortable. And no trying to buy us," Oliver added firmly. "We don't need your money." A flash of something, perhaps respect, crossed Dominic's features. "Understood. And you have to be honest," Ethan concluded. "Always, even when it's hard." This last condition seemed to give Dominic pause, as if he recognized the challenge it presented to someone who had built much of his life on carefully constructed narratives rather than raw truth. But after a moment he nodded. "I promise to try," he said, the qualification itself a kind of honesty. Arya watched this exchange with a complex mixture of emotions: pride in her children's clarity and boundaries, wariness of Dominic's intentions, and a strange, unexpected relief that they might have found a path forward that served the children's needs without compromising the life she had built for them. "Perhaps," she suggested, "we could start with brunch? There's a restaurant downstairs that the children like." "I'd like that," Dominic said, and for the first time since he'd arrived, a genuine smile softened his features. It transformed him, reminding Arya briefly of the man she had fallen in love with before ambition and insecurity had hardened him. As they prepared to leave the suite, Sophia approached Arya while the boys were getting their jackets. "Is this okay, Mom?" she asked quietly. "Really okay? We don't have to if it makes you sad." Arya knelt to her daughter's level, cupping her face gently. "This isn't about me, sweetheart. It's about what's right for you three. And yes, it's really okay. People can hurt each other deeply and still find a way forward, especially when there are children involved." "But you built our whole life without him," Sophia persisted. "You did everything. And I'll continue to be your mother, your champion, your safe harbor," Arya assured her. "Nothing changes that. But having your father in your life, knowing where you come from, that's something I always wanted for you, even when I was angriest at him." Sophia studied her mother's face with those perceptive gray eyes, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw there. "Okay, but if he's mean to you, the deal's off." Arya laughed softly, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Noted." As they left the suite, Dominic fell into step beside Arya, the children walking slightly ahead, already discussing which menu items they planned to order. "They're extraordinary," he said quietly. "You've done an amazing job with them." "Yes, I have," Arya agreed, accepting the compliment without false modesty. "They're the best parts of both of us, without the worst parts of either." "I've missed so much," he said, an unexpected vulnerability in his voice. 9 years I can never get back." "That was your choice," Arya reminded him, not unkindly. "But they have many years ahead. What matters now is what you do with the time you have, not the time you lost." Dominic nodded, watching the children as they waited for the elevator. "Vanessa left last night," he said abruptly. "Went to her parents in Connecticut. She says she needs time to think." "I'm sorry," Arya said, and meant it. "That wasn't my intention." "Wasn't it?" He glanced at her skeptically. "No. My intention was for my children to know their father, and for you to know them. Whatever happens between you and Vanessa is collateral damage from your own choices, not my goal." He accepted this with a slight nod. "The baby complicates things." "Children often do," Arya replied with a small smile. "They have a way of forcing us to be better than we are." As they stepped into the elevator, Sophia between them and the boys discussing the relative merits of pancakes versus waffles, Arya felt a strange sense of completion. Not because Dominic was back in her life, that chapter was firmly closed, but because a circle that had been broken for 9 years was beginning to mend, not for her sake but for the 3 remarkable children they had created together. If you've ever had to face a difficult truth or rebuild your life after betrayal, hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. In our next segment, we'll see how this unexpected family navigates their new reality, and whether Dominic Blackwood can truly become the father his children deserve. 1 year later, the garden of Aria's Cambridge home bloomed with early summer flowers, a riot of colors framing the gathering on the back lawn. Beneath a white tent decorated with twinkling lights, for children sat at a small table of their own, separate from but within sight of the adults' dinner table. 10-year-old Sophia Winters Blackwood, the children had chosen to hyphenate their names 6 months earlier, was deep in conversation with her 3-month-old half-sister, Lily, who gazed up at her from a bouncy seat with wide-eyed fascination. Beside them, Oliver and Ethan were engaged in what appeared to be a serious debate about the dessert options, their voices rising and falling with the passion only 10-year-olds can bring to discussions of chocolate versus fruit tarts. At the adults' table, Aria sat beside her husband James Chun, their hands occasionally finding each other's beneath the table in the comfortable, affectionate way of newlyweds. Across from them, Dominic and Vanessa completed the unlikely family circle, their initial hostility toward the new man in Aria's life having gradually transformed into genuine respect as they navigated the complex family dynamics together. The triplets' birthday party next month, Dominic was saying, consulting his phone calendar. I've cleared the entire weekend, but I wanted to check if you'd prefer I stay at a hotel or if the guest room is available. The guest room is fine, Aria replied, exchanging a quick glance with James, who nodded in agreement. The children would love having you in the house for the whole weekend. And there's plenty of space for Vanessa and Lily too, if you're all coming. Vanessa nodded, adjusting the baby monitor through which she was keeping an eye on Lily. We wouldn't miss it. Lily's first trip to Boston. The easy domesticity of the conversation would have seemed impossible a year earlier, when Vanessa had still been reeling from the discovery of Dominic's triplets and his decade of lies. The path to this moment had not been smooth. There had been tears, recriminations, a brief separation during which Dominic had moved into a hotel while Vanessa considered whether their relationship could survive such a fundamental breach of trust. What had saved them, ironically, was the triplets themselves. When Vanessa had finally agreed to meet them, 2 weeks after the reunion, she had been disarmed by their directness, their lack of guile or manipulation. They had asked her straightforward questions about her feelings, had listened to her answers with genuine interest, had treated her not as an adversary but as another adult navigating a difficult situation not entirely of her making. He lied to you too, Sophia had observed during that first tense meeting. That must have hurt a lot. The simple acknowledgement of her pain, coming from the child who represented the physical proof of that lie, had broken through Vanessa's defensive anger in a way no adult reasoning could have. By the end of that meeting, she had begun to separate her feelings about Dominic's deception from her feelings about the children themselves. Rebuilding trust had taken months of therapy, both as a couple and individually. The process had been complicated by Vanessa's pregnancy and the birth of Lily, events that brought joy but also heightened the emotional stakes of their reconciliation. Throughout it all, Dominic had maintained his commitment to being present for all his children, dividing his time between New York and Boston with the same focus he brought to his business ventures. For Aria, the year had brought its own evolution. As the triplets developed a relationship with their father, she had indeed found space to rediscover aspects of herself beyond motherhood. The agency continued to thrive under her leadership, with a recent expansion into film and television rights that had brought both professional satisfaction and financial security. Most significantly, she had found love again with James, a literature professor she'd met through a client. Unlike Dominic, James was quiet and thoughtful, more comfortable discussing 19th-century poetry than corporate acquisitions. The triplets had approached him with their usual directness, assessing his character through careful observation before gradually accepting him into their circle of trust. He makes Mom laugh, Sophia had declared after their third meeting, apparently considering this the highest possible recommendation. Their wedding 6 months ago had been small and intimate, with the triplets serving as best man and maid of honor, Oliver and Sophia, and ring-bearer, Ethan. To everyone's surprise, Dominic had offered his genuine congratulations, acknowledging that James brought a happiness to Aria and the children that he recognized and respected. Now, as the summer evening softened into twilight, Aria looked around the garden at this unlikely extended family they had created. Not traditional, not perfect, but functional and, in its own way loving. The children moved easily between the adults in their lives, secure in the knowledge that they were valued by each of them in different but meaningful ways. "I never imagined this," Vanessa said quietly, following Arya's gaze to where the triplets were now showing Lily a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. "A year ago, when I found out about them, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see how any of this could possibly work." "Neither could I," Arya admitted, feeling James's reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I expected battle lines and custody fights, not family dinners." "We have the children to thank for that," Dominic observed, his expression softening as he watched his 4 children together. They refused to let the adults' issues become their problem. They insisted on connection rather than division. "They get that from their mother," Vanessa said, surprising Arya with the genuine compliment. "That emotional intelligence, that ability to see beyond the surface to what really matters." Arya smiled, touched by the acknowledgement. "Thank you, though I think they've taught me as much about emotional intelligence as I've taught them." As the evening progressed and dessert was served, both chocolate and fruit tarts, a diplomatic solution to the boys' debate, Arya found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 10 years ago, devastated by Dominic's rejection and lies, she could never have imagined sitting across a table from him and his new wife, her own loving husband beside her, sharing a meal and parenting discussions with genuine goodwill. The path from that dark time to this peaceful evening had been neither straight nor easy. There had been moments of doubt, of anger resurfacing, of boundaries tested and redrawn. But through it all, the triplets had remained her North Star, their well-being the compass that guided her decisions even when forgiveness seemed impossible. And somewhere along that journey, she had discovered that the greatest victory wasn't in proving Dominic wrong or exposing his lies, though that vindication had certainly been satisfying. The greatest victory was in building a life so full and meaningful that his presence or absence no longer defined her happiness. In raising children who understood their own worth wasn't determined by their father's acknowledgement. In finding the strength to allow truth to heal what deception had broken, and in opening her heart to love again with James, who cherished both her and the children for exactly who they were. As the triplets raced across the lawn in an impromptu game of tag, their laughter rising into the summer evening, Arya caught Dominic watching her and James with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What?" she asked, curious. "I was just thinking," he replied, "about how differently this all could have gone, if you'd been a different kind of person, if you'd let bitterness guide your choices instead of what was best for them." "There were moments of bitterness," she acknowledged, leaning slightly into James's embrace. "Plenty of them. But you never let it consume you. You never used the children as weapons against me, even when I deserved it." He shook his head slightly. "I'm not sure I would have been as generous in your position." "It wasn't generosity," Arya corrected gently. "It was survival. Holding on to anger would have poisoned me from the inside out. I had 3 children who needed me whole and healthy, not broken by resentment." Dominic nodded, accepting her perspective. "Well, whatever you call it, I'm grateful. They're extraordinary children, and the life you built for them with or without me is a testament to your strength." From across the garden, Oliver called for his father to join their game, waving impatiently when Dominic didn't immediately respond. With an apologetic smile, he rose and jogged across the lawn, soon absorbed into the children's play with an abandon that would have seemed impossible in the controlled, image-conscious man Arya had married. "He's different with them," Vanessa observed, watching her husband chase their daughter across the grass. "Softer, more present. Children have a way of breaking through our carefully constructed facades," James remarked, his academic's insight tempered with the warmth of a man who had come to love Arya's children as his own. "Of forcing us to be more authentic, for better or worse. In his case, definitely for better." Vanessa turned to Arya and James, her expression serious. "I know this past year hasn't been easy for either of you, sharing the children after so many years. Thank you for making space for us in their lives. They deserve to know all the people who love them," Arya said simply, her hand finding James's. "That's what family really means. As darkness fell and the garden lights twinkled like earthbound stars, the children's energy finally began to wane. Lily had long since fallen asleep in her carrier, and even the usually indefatigable Oliver was showing signs of fatigue. As the evening wound down and goodbyes were exchanged, promises of phone calls and next visits confirmed, Arya stood with James at their garden gate, watching Dominic help Vanessa secure Lily's carrier in their car. The scene was so ordinary, so domestic, yet represented such an extraordinary journey from where they had begun. 10 years ago, she had fled New York with a broken heart and an uncertain future, carrying 3 tiny lives that would become her greatest joy and purpose. Today, she stood in the garden of a home she shared with a man who loved her completely, surrounded by a family that defied conventional definitions but worked nonetheless. The truth she had revealed at that Harvard reunion had indeed changed everything, but not in the ways she had feared or anticipated. Instead of destruction, it had ultimately led to healing. Instead of division, to an unexpected kind of unity. Instead of an ending, to a new beginning for all of them. As the car pulled away and she and James guided her sleepy children into the house, Arya felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead as the children grew and family dynamics evolved. But they had found a way forward together, built on truth rather than deception, on respect rather than resentment, on the recognition that love, in all its complex, messy, imperfect forms, was ultimately stronger than pride or fear or even past betrayals. And that, more than any revenge or vindication, was the true triumph of her story. If this tale of truth, resilience, and unexpected healing touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. Remember, sometimes the most painful endings can lead to the most beautiful beginnings, and the truth, however difficult, will always find its way to the light. Share your thoughts in the comments below about times when honesty changed everything in your own life, and join me next week for another story that will remind you of the power of courage, forgiveness, and the strength we find when we're pushed to our limits.